Hey guys, it's Nick back for another video. No, it's been a little while since you've last seen me. I've just been busy with school and getting some new clients, but I'm back and I got a very special episode of the show and a very special guest. Today I've got Dr. David Perrodin. He's not a digital marketer, but he is, well, let's see, he's got quite a list of credentials here. So Dr. David Perrodin promotes a safety initiative of taking action before a disaster strikes. So he's kind of like a school safety guy. He is an author, researcher, professor, legal expert witness, and the host of the Safety Doc podcast, which I actually have an episode with him that I'll probably put in the description. So David earned a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where he also researched high-stakes safety decisions in education, healthcare, and the military. He's delivered 2 school safety presentations on Wisconsin public television and also wrote and directed a film about school safety with Pulitzer Prize winner David Obst. Dr. Perrodin's work has been published in a number of journals, and he's frequently interviewed by the media about school safety topics. Seeing as how often we have school shootings in this country, that's probably pretty often, I'd imagine. He is also the author of The School of Errors, a book about rethinking school safety in America, which I've read the book and I loved it. And in my personal opinion, if you have kids or work in the school system at all, this is a book you have to read. And even if none of those apply to you, it's still kind of fun to read. But yeah, let's go check it out. I'll also put a link to the book on Amazon. So David, welcome to the show, man. Thanks for being on.
Hey, you bet. Nick, thanks for having me on your show. Greatly looking forward to it.
All right. So just for people who haven't known you, I've given you quite a bit of an extensive bio. So just describe in your own words, like what you do and what you really focus on in School of Errors and what your goal is when you do these presentations.
Yeah. So Nick, talking about School of Errors, I call it the most honest book about the $3 billion school safety industry. I was a school administrator. I retired. And now since I'm out of it, I can actually tell the truth about what's happening with school safety without ramifications of losing my job and things like that. So there's a lot of crazy stuff that's actually happening in school safety. $3 billion worth of products being sold are not making us any safer. So I help people make decisions, school safety decisions that will actually make them safer. Now, the irony of that is they usually don't cost any money. It's just changing practice, situational awareness, things like this. That's an uphill battle, strangely, because people want things that they can go out and touch and see for safety, and they don't want to do some of these other things, which are just more common sense. So I'm really paddling upstream because right now school safety in America is all about fortification.
Right. And if you're watching this, you might be thinking, well, Nick, that sounds great, but what is the overlap? You're a digital marketing guy. Dr. Perrodin's a school safety guy. What are you guys doing on each other's shows? Well, the reason is because if you read School of Errors, one of the things that the doc talks a lot about is this thing called customer perceived value, which is a kind of fancy marketing term, but it's basically the idea that things are only worth something because the customer or the potential client believes it is. And in the marketing world, this can take the form of fancy tracking software, which isn't worth it for a lot of businesses anyway. And so if you guys have been watching me for a while, you remember last year I did a video with my friend Leon about the dark side of digital marketing to show you how a lot of marketers don't know what they're doing. This is kind of like, you could think of it as a part 2 to that, because we're going to see how a lot of these marketers that are pitching schools like these fortification methods, they don't really know what they're doing. But on top of that, they probably don't even believe that the thing they're selling is actually going to be able to help the schools. So this is kind of a lesson in the ability, marketing as a tool is a lot more powerful than you guys realize. And if you take Seth's course, you're going to be gaining this power. So please use it wisely. With that being said, let's dive in. So my first question here is, in your career, what has been the most absurd or just useless method of school fortification you've seen somebody try to pitch to a district? And how did they use consumer perceived value to sell it? And did they end up actually selling it?
Yeah, and the fascinating part of this question is I had to figure out what was the best story to tell, because there are some crazy things which are marketed and actually bought by schools. But let's talk about a school district in Oklahoma in the past year.
Oh,
So this school district was, of course, everybody is bringing in school safety consultants, school safety experts to talk to them about safety and to pitch products. So let's first step back a little bit on that. There isn't a certification for a school safety expert. So someone who gets hired by a company that's selling a product and they say, go out to the school and sell our product, they might know an hour's worth of school safety, something quick they got in a training. So these aren't people who have a deep base of training. But anyway, the school district in Oklahoma, the superintendent, okay, goes into what I describe as an igloo. Okay, so imagine this igloo. And it is basically a bulletproof. Now we know the term bulletproof is a little subjective because it depends upon, you know, what kind of rounds you're using in that. But fortunately for him, it was bulletproof. He went into this igloo, Nick, this igloo, and then closed the door. And there's video of this. I don't know if it's still out there, but there was video at the time on YouTube. People start opening up with all kinds of different guns, right? They're just firing away at this igloo. And it's insane, right? You got to be kidding me that this isn't CGI. This isn't some kind of unusual. No, this is authentic. So the superintendent, then everybody's firing away at this igloo. They stop, door opens, he gets out, and the whole thing is, we need these igloos in our school. Okay, so we can put these in every classroom. If a school shooter comes in, everybody gets in the igloo, and then you're going to be safe. So the moment he walks out of this igloo and everybody is like, wow, we don't have to hire another superintendent. He survived. They bought 7 at $30,000 a piece. Okay. And instantly, boom, $210,000 spent. Now, in addition, they bought more of these things. Okay. Because, right, if you have 7 classrooms that have them, Nick, if you're in the other classroom that doesn't have it, why don't we have the bulletproof igloo in our class? And first of all, the absurdity of this, right? Because that you're going to be able to hustle everybody into this igloo. The igloo took up like 1/3 of a classroom anyway. So like all of the desks now are really close together because the igloo's in the class. So just logistically, we're thinking about this. And how about public address system? Like, would things be heard? But none of that counts, right? It's just that we have the bulletproof igloo. I did more research into this specific district. They're struggling, like fiscally. They're in big trouble, but they had $210,000 plus to spend on these igloos. So this is customer perceived value, because think about if you're watching people firing at this igloo, right? The moment the superintendent walks out, the product's sold, right? There's no doubt about it. The moment you walk out, we've got to have that because it worked. It was remarkable. This is like, I take it back to, 100 years ago when they had old steam engines on the railroad. Sometimes they would put one on one side of the track, one on another. They'd run them together and then they'd collide. And just for dramatic effect, like thousands of people would show up to watch this and they'd sell tickets and all of that. It's kind of like that. So the district went with this, right? How insane. And yet, like, they bought more. So I think this is one example of many. But I would say, Nick, like 5 years ago, the craziest things I saw were maybe like chalkboards or whiteboards that were bulletproof that you could take off and hide behind. And I'm like, okay. But now it's this type of stuff. And these are big ticket items, right? $210,000 for this district to drop on these things. Insane.
My God. And it's like the other problem I can already imagine with the igloos. Like, did you find out how many people can the igloo hold?
Yeah, so I think it's something like 25, 28, but that's like if you're really packed in the igloo. Igloo has one entrance, and to get into the igloo is not a fast process. I think some of this has been kind of scrubbed off of YouTube because of people questioning this a little bit, but yeah, and this isn't the only district, right? It's customer perceived value. So this district gets it, and then the other districts around, which will be social proof, saying, this district bought the igloos. Why don't we have the igloos? And then it starts to ripple. So, what research did the manufacturer of this do? They probably, fired rounds at it and did whatever, but did they know about schools? Did they know about public address systems? And did they know about the other issues going on in schools? For example, fights or schools having outbreaks of meningitis and things like this. So we need to wipe things down. And I wrote an article, Bacteria or Bullets, for Crisis Response Journal, saying, we just get so focused on these very less probable things, and we go all out. And there's money. I mean, there's the districts will dip into their fund balance. They'll do whatever they have to get these. The superintendent was like, just yes, when he came out. It's crazy.
Of course. The problem I can already see with the igloos, it's like they're meant for, like, let's just say 30 people, right? Basically, those are a round number. What if a classroom has 31 people in it? Like, what if there's 30 students,
right,
but then there's like a guest speaker? How are they going to decide who gets to be the 31st person?
Who gets on the boat, right? Yeah, who gets on the lifeboat? Who gets it? Absolutely, Nick. And what if you're in the hallway? What if you're in the gym or the cafeteria? I mean, what if you're out on the playground? Are you going to put an igloo out there? I mean, so all of these things, like, once you get one step into a discussion logically, like we're having right now, it starts to fall apart. But people don't want that. People just want to see this. And if I go into that, if I'm a parent, I can walk into that room, I can tap on it, I can see it. It's there, it's tangible. And this is just crazy. This is one example of how people just go and all in on something that is marketed to them with safety. It's downhill marketing.
Yeah. It's also, you're selling expensive products. Like what you said, it was like, what, $30,000 per igloo, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it probably doesn't cost them anywhere near $30,000 to make it. So you have school districts that they have money, like if you can convince them, and something that's a very expensive product. That is a marketer's dream right there. Like I tell people that I help from Seth's course, and I just tell people in general, the easiest way to make a high ROI from any marketing campaign is to sell expensive products. Because like let's say you have $100 to spend on marketing. If you're selling a $10 product, you have to sell at least 10 of those products to, at least break even. Any more than that is profit, but you need to sell at least 10. Well, now let's say, like what I have, one of my clients is a wedding photographer. Their stuff is like at least 2,000. If I take that same amount of money in advertising, and if I can just bring them one client, boom, that's like at least 10 to 20 times return on investment. So products like the ones you've seen, like these absurd products, that is just like a marketer's dream. Like even if you're not that good of a marketer and don't have that good numbers, like the product is so expensive that you could probably still make it work.
Yeah, absolutely. And, once you have this in place and you have, the video of it really wasn't anything more than, either a phone video or like a cheap camcorder to get this image. And you can show that to a few people. I mean, yeah, I mean, it's powerful. And especially if you just aren't informed of all these other discussions of why it comes down, Nick. I mean, if someone actually said, did this work? It did, but would it actually work in a situation of if it was school violence? And that's a whole different question. I mean, it's like when people put bollards in front of schools and they'll say, well, if someone was to drive a car through the entrance, like this would stop them. I'm like, well, it might. I mean, technically it might, but we also know like that just doesn't happen, right? We know that you're much more likely to have a lightning strike while you're outside and be killed on a playground or on a playing field than this. So like, technically people aren't inaccurate sometimes when they sell these things. It's just like the probability is so minute that it just isn't where they should be putting their money.
Right. And in the school of errors, like, you don't just describe the problems, you actually give some actual solutions, like what they could do instead. Like there was this, like you could have basically focus groups after fire drills to see if there were any problems. Like, oh yeah, we couldn't hear the announcements in the bathroom, or we couldn't lock this door in a lockdown drill. Or you're talking about institutional knowledge, like, okay, maybe you could just say that teachers have to make instructional videos for the new teachers.
Right.
And the vast majority of them, like assuming it's a standard school that already has laptops and whatnot, they're free or they cost basically nothing. So I guess the next question is, when you offer these solutions, has consumer perceived value or the lack thereof actually like worked against you when you offer your solutions? Like, in other words, has someone ever said like, Dave, school safety can't be this simple. Like, you're telling me like we have all these school shootings and all that, but we can do all of this without spending any money. What about all of this? Anyone can plainly see the world just isn't safe for kids anymore. Like, have you ever run into that?
Oh yeah, Nick, all the time. So it's a great question, right? If I'm offering a way to do things, and the first thing you're doing is reaching for your checkbook, and I'm saying, no, keep that over there because this isn't really gonna cost you anything outside of my time, working with you. People just don't believe it. Like that's the narrative. The rhetoric is so much leaned already toward you have to buy something, fortification. That when I come in, I talk about situational awareness, and they're like, okay, but then I get deeper into it. So, well, for 120 years, this started out with Sir Baden-Powell and Boy Scouts, and then the military uses it, and this is actually how they train snipers and reconnaissance scouts, and so I can give this evidence. But people will tune that out. They're so ingrained that they want to see safety. I've had superintendents tell me that in classes I've instructed for superintendents. I get what you're saying, Dave, but my school board, parents, they want to see the fence. They want to see the new cameras. So it's disheartening because I can be dismissed pretty easy if you're already in this confirmation bias mindset of it has to be a device. Because then, what I'm saying, even though I can empirically back it up, they don't want to hear it. And then vendors, of course, aren't supportive of my work in this because they're selling this, right, Nick? They're selling this
That's their
4K
job.
camera. This is their job. This is their livelihood. So they can introduce, the liar's dividend, I guess, or some question into it of saying, Dr. Perrodin, he's kind of a renegade. He's out there on this stuff, and just trust me. Like, go with this. So and here's another thing. Anytime I tend to, market or even do a podcast, Nick, even if I do a podcast, anytime close to a school shooting, people come out and also attack. Hey, you're marketing, you're going against making schools safer because what you're saying in your podcast is more, situational awareness, bringing in your insurance company to assessment. And people have attacked me. Like I had a podcast that dropped 6 hours after a school shooting. I wasn't around. I think I was on vacation. I scheduled it ahead of time. And I had a threat on an Amazon review that Amazon had to take down. People threatening me, you're trying to make money off of this, and this isn't the way, and people need it. So I find myself also, it gets really tricky even with my podcast and which I don't monetize, in some of the papers I write, the timing, if it hits wrong, that's just not the narrative they want to hear. They believe devices make them safe, and if you're saying something different, especially right after a school shooting, you're almost a heretic for doing that.
Yeah. And guys, if you're watching, you're probably a member of SES course. Where have we heard that before? If you're reaching out to potential clients to get your own experience, digital marketing doesn't work. I already have someone doing posting on Facebook, or, it's all this newfangled stuff. It's all about TV commercials. It's the same. It sounds like it's the same shit in school safety. But yeah, you were mentioning how people are attacking you, trying to discredit you. Like, how exactly have people tried to do that? Have they come out with like any rebuttal videos? And have they actually had any success in like banning you from like, oh yeah, we're not going to allow you to speak at our school anymore? Like, what's happening there?
Well, the good news is no rebuttal videos yet, Nick. So, but what happens is so discrediting. I was offered a keynote at a substantial school safety conference. So they sought me out and said, we want you to be our keynote presenter. And that had a large dollar amount with it. Within 24 hours, they contacted me and said, we need to rescind our offer to you. And I said, okay, can you tell me why? Well, ultimately, the reason, they're vendors. their vendors are selling products, right? And their vendors, I used to run conferences of 500 people, 800 people. Vendors will pay you $15,000, $20,000 a space at a conference like that. So their vendors are selling products. I'm then giving a keynote talking about situational awareness, talking about the issues with marketing products. That doesn't match, right? That doesn't match. And they're looking at this saying, we can't have you here because our vendors would drop out. This is how we make our money. I mean, Nick, if you run a conference, you can make $500,000 off of a conference. Sounds insane, but yeah, I mean, people will charge $800 for a conference. They'll have 1,000 people in a venue. They'll get vendors to pay this money in for their space. They'll have events at night and all of that. You can't go against the grain. So I've been shut out of conferences, and that's pretty regular now. Like, there probably isn't a conference that has not been taken over by school vendors and marketers. So that's been a closed door, which is frustrating because that was a terrific way to get information out to people, networking, and that door's shut. I haven't had any content challenges, and I think I'm good enough, or I'd say I'm better than good enough, but when I've been on PBS twice, right? I did a dissertation on school safety, written several articles, wrote a book, and the book was researched. Went through proofs, member checks, all of that. So no one comes in and challenges me on content. They'll just, take an angle of saying, yeah, this is where he's at. He knows this area, but here's another area that we think is better for your district. So go with this. Now with that, like, I'm not marketing to hire or to get new clients and things like that. Like, I have the clients that I work with. I do some other things. So I'm more in this retirement mode. But yeah, definitely there is a very aggressive way to try to shut me down. And it's effective, like from conferences and that, because if I'm a vendor and I'm saying I'm going to pull out of the conference and my $20,000 are coming with me, if you don't get a different presenter, and usually presenters now at safety conferences are all Secret Service, CIA, police, things like that, who are going to talk about fortifications. So, and of course you get some people who are just spiteful, like they don't want to see you rise, and then they just try to take you down. And it can be other people in the industry, narcissists, and they're just petty, but they have positions of power, so they'll freeze you out on some things. But
people get touchy when you attack their livelihood, especially if they're like supposed to be in positions of power. It's like, oh, you're the chief marketer at this one agency. How come I stole this client from you? Don't you dare talk to that. I do a horrible impression, but they're just like, I'm the one with the power here. I'm like, numbers don't lie. Look at those ROI metrics.
Oh, absolutely right.
But it's funny, like, if they must think you're a threat, otherwise they wouldn't bother to shut you out.
Yeah, well, I mean, it would be a threat, because if I'm talking and saying, as I wrote in a book, situational awareness, call the insurance company to come in and do assessments. They're going to be honest with you. They're going to have data that the vendors won't have, right? They're going to know data of how much violence is occurring in your district, like in the community, if there's any hazardous waste being moved by train or something close by. I mean, all of this data where they can put together, really think about safety. It's not going to cost you anything. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a threatening position, and it's frustrating. There are very few people out there now. I mean, Nick, they've kind of dropped off. Like, when I started doing this maybe 5 years ago, I would say it's 50-50. People talking about here's what to sensibly do, and here's people talking about marketing. And now it's mostly people trying to market fortifications. And I'm out there with a few other people really trying to bring sense to this, but there are few. The numbers are dwindling. So it's kind of like we all gather up and try to be united in that, because it's just gone so far the other way. If I wanted to, Nick, people have come to me and said, we'll give you this large amount of money if you'll back our product. Right. And it's totally insane. It's something like I would never agree with.
What?
But it's.
They now look at your content and be like, why the hell would that?
It's insane. And it's a huge amount of money. And it's one of those things you just blink at, because I'm like, if I actually accepted this is a massive amount of money. But of course, you can never go back after that. And I don't believe in it. But it is weird of how how that approach is. Like, what would it take to quiet someone down and kind of pseudo get them on our side? And I've seen some of my colleagues go for that. Like, they've been bought off. They actually been bought off.
And so let's say they discredit you. Essentially what happens if they just discredit you, it's like, oh, this Dr. David Perrodin, he doesn't know what he's doing. Like, if I'm not mistaken, they usually proceed to just go ahead with what they've been doing, like the fortifications, the little flip charts of like what to do if a plane falls from the sky. So the next question, I guess, is what happens when consumer perceived value is just given completely unchecked and given free reign over like the district's school safety decisions? Like, in other words, imagine this one school that blindly buys every fortification method presented to it. Like, if someone's like, hi, I'm Nick Schulin, or I'm here to say, stop right there, we're in, put us down for 20.
Right.
So imagine a school that does that. It would take forever and trillions of dollars, but eventually these marketers, they're just going to run out of things to sell them, aside from like the most ridiculous products like, okay, here's a school shooter drill with convicted criminals from the local prison. It's like, eventually they get to that point where they just run out of products. What happens then?
Well, Nick, first of all, what you're describing, districts of saying, yeah, kind of stop right there, you've sold us, right? That happens all the time, and it's happening more often. So that's actually not the exception. I would say that's the rule. There have been multiple studies that have come out and said there's going to be a point when schools will reach saturation, right? If I'm selling you a camera system for your district and you pay $500,000 for it, if I come back in 2 years and try to sell you another camera system, you'd be like, this one still does what it needs to do. So like, these studies come out and say we'll hit a saturation point, but I argue, I'm like, that's not what I see at all. Like, I see people coming back and saying, we sold you this camera system, but now 2 years later, we can sell you this upgrade or this whatever. So, and things do get crazier. Like phone apps, for example, Nick, everybody can make a phone app, everybody upgrades apps and they'll do things. Well, now it has geo mapping. So it'll do this, it'll tell you exactly where you're at and where everybody's at. And if they have, so I don't think saturation is as big of a concern as what vendors initially thought, like that they would hit a point and people just wouldn't keep buying. But as you said, there was an episode of South Park, it's called Dead Kids. I don't know if you saw it like a year or two ago, but I did a review of it. So I watched it and I actually was critical of it, but not from the reason that I thought it was tasteless or something like that. But what it had is South Park kept getting school shooters, right? So it would be like this week, 2 weeks later, it'd be another school shooting. And the school like got attacked like 10 times during a year or something. And then eventually, like, Cartman's out with a gun and as a hall monitor and Butters and stuff like that. But I said, actually, the way that this would work is you just would keep fortifying. So eventually you'd have like one entrance people would go through, like on South Park, if they would have done that. And then after the next shooting, you have another entrance and another, then pretty soon at the last episode, like every student would have had their own personal guard. It would have gone to that. So this whole thing, schools, the problem is,
what if the guards start shooting the kids? We should arm the kids.
We should arm the kids, and then or we should have some artificial intelligence drone like flying, drones flying all above, like watching everything. I mean, that's where I went with this, of saying actually, if they would have done this episode in this way, it would have been really reflective of what happens in districts. But to your point, there's only so much money. Here's what happens. So districts will take money from instruction to pay for safety. So then they have less counselors, they have bigger classrooms, they have books and materials which aren't being updated. Their smart boards aren't being updated because they're putting money into bollards and other things. So that's where it just starts to get really tippy, and then they even have less staff. But I'll tell you, I have seen a customer perceived value. Again, you think you'd get to the saturation point where people just say, we've put all this money into this. I don't think we can keep going down and now get this additional, like the drone, like someone's marketing maybe a drone to us that'll fly around and be able to like track things. People they go for it. So it's crazy because all of the money just starts to siphon out of other areas that are very essential. I mean, things like Nick, schools would rather turn their thermostat down in winter and save a little bit of money to put that towards school safety than to keep their thermostat. Things like this is so insane. It's just not. In research, customer perceived value research trying to figure out what works. Research takes too long, right? From a customer perceived value, research is going to take 3 to 5 years. If I'm a legislator, I might not be in office. That doesn't get funded. But if I buy bollards, if I buy fencing, if I buy anything marketed to me, and my vendor says, I can have that igloo next week. I can have that shipped to you. We'll have the installers. It'll be in 10 days. Boom. You've just sold it. So I wish I could tell you where this actually hit a tipping point somewhere. I have never seen it hit a tipping point anywhere.
So essentially, wait, even if like they did go all in, they would run out of money before marketers ran out of products or updates.
Oh yeah, completely. Right. You'd run out of money. And the thing is, I mean, every time you seem to run out of money, there's a new round of state grants because there's a shooting that happens somewhere that's high profile. And then there's, panic parents come to the legislators want to do something. So they just put more money out to the districts. So yeah, I think you're right in the fact that you would actually run out of money before you ran out of products.
Oh my God. And it's funny. It's like the big thing about consumer perceived value is that people, just like clients in the marketing world, they want results like that. I mean, I specialize in PPC, which is paid ads. So like Google ads, Facebook ads. You can get results a little bit faster. But there's the other thing, SEO, like making sure your website shows up on Google, the search results where you want it. That takes time. Like now if you're really good at it, you can make it take a little bit less time, but
Sure.
It's not going to happen just like this. It's going to be it's going to take like at least a month or two to get any meaningful results, but clients don't understand that. So it sounds like, I'm surprised how much like overlap there is between school safety and digital marketing. Cause like there's a lack of regulation. Like the only difference.
Completely.
Yeah, like it's the Wild West. The only difference is that digital marketing does have a certification. It just doesn't mean a lot. So like I do Google ads. Google has its own certification. You can be Google ads certified. But the thing is, like most marketers will admit this, like using your Google ads certification to prove that you're a competent digital marketer.
Yeah.
Kind of like trying to use your driver's license to prove you're a good driver.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There are agencies that make a big deal out of the fact that we're a Google certified partner. That's like your Uber driver making a big deal out of the fact that he has a driver's license. I'm like, okay, does anybody not have a driver's license?
Yeah,
we do have certifications you can get, but they really don't mean that much.
And so, Nick, this is a new industry starting in school safety. So just this year, I've seen conferences crop up, and the conference will say, attending our conference we'll give you a certification in, school safety awareness certified, which means nothing. Like it has nothing, but it is now an actual certificate. And that, boom, people are going for that left and right. And I've asked the question, like, what the hell does this actually mean? Like your school safety awareness certified? Like what? It's just an add-on to a conference. But again, people view it as some holy credential and that they're getting this extra value. So that is also this customer perceived value when marketers are going after teachers who are attending conferences and they're marketing directly to teachers and principals. Principal can go back to the district. Hey, I have the certification in whatever. And the thing, Nick, you can go on to, it's called REMS TA, REMS TA, Readiness Emergency Management. They have a school division. It's from, I think, U.S. Department of Ed or maybe FEMA. FEMA has a lot of great free courses also I talk about when I teach. But you can get an actual certificate from a solid free program out of those versus like paying $800 to go to a conference where their vendors are just going to present to you whatever they want to present. And then you walk out with this really nice, shiny certificate that you can come back and show to your school district. And what these things mean, it's just crazy. But yeah, that's where if I come in and I question, what does that mean? They'll either discredit me and say, yeah, whatever, or they don't have to tell me, right? It's not a Freedom of Information Act. They're just running their conference. They're saying, here, it's a certificate. It's crazy.
I'd imagine, like, I haven't been to a marketing conference, but it seems like I read blogs to stay up to date on what's new in the digital marketing world. But a lot of the things that are talking about conferences, a lot of them are just trying to sell you a product in some way or another.
Completely.
Like, you've probably seen this. Have you seen like Facebook ads where instead of the product directly, they get you to sign up for a free webinar?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yep, that the marketing conferences seem like pretty much the same shit. It is
It is.
like, although some webinars are actually pretty good. There was this
Yeah.
one webinar that actually taught me something I didn't know. But like that is the vast minority of webinars.
Let me tell you a funny story. So I attended a conference. Or I didn't attend a conference. I had bought I bought some materials back when I was a school administrator. Um, it was, I don't know, like a workbook series or something like that. The company sent me a huge trophy, and it was like fucking like an MBA like trophy type thing with wood and metal, and it's like, thank you, you know, Mr. Perrodin, for making this commitment to student education and whatever. So I got this, and I'm like, this is pretty impressive. Like, this is several $100 trophy. I had it up in my office, and then you just look at it, and the it's just weird. Like, this is just marketing, right? This is just to make me feel important and to validate that I made a good choice in their opinion because I bought their product. So they send me this impressive trophy. It's like, how the hell did you win this thing? I mean, it was so insane. Yeah, again, I was like, I should have been next to, LeBron James holding up the trophy or something, like for an NBA title. And so whoever came up with that marketing idea, that's never happened to me before. But that was actually, I guess I felt a little bit of being impressed and being recognized to get this major award, like the leg lamp, right, from A Christmas Story. I mean, what the hell?
It is a good marketing, but it's something. It's just a signal. It doesn't mean anything. It just looks like it does. Like, obviously, most of the people that watch my channel, they're from Seth's course. Seth doesn't offer like a certificate of completion, like you've completed the in-demand career blueprint. And some people have asked about that. It's like, no, because it doesn't really represent anything.
Right.
And one, because the course isn't that well known. Like Seth isn't a household name in the marketing world. Like if you just went to a random marketer and asked, oh, who's Seth Himes? Most people wouldn't know who he is unless they've taken his course. He's not like Tony Robbins, where people who aren't in the motivational space have still heard of him.
Sure.
But two, even if he was, like, you've learned from him, that doesn't mean anything if you don't do anything with the skills you've learned. But yeah, so that's still the thing in the school safety world, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And in two, I mean, we've had concerns, for years of like doctors, right? Doctors going to conferences and getting a whole bunch of free stuff. Well, I mean, if you're going to school safety conferences, if you're not walking out of there with a bag of $100+ worth of goodies, I mean, it's pretty much, that's the way that it is now. And these elaborate, meals and socials that they'll put on at night, and everything is paid for. It's I've been in this for quite a while, and it wasn't that way 10 years ago. And by goodness, like 15, 20 years ago, it wasn't that way at all. And now, I mean, it's whining and dining, right? I mean, it is. And if you're a school folks, you don't get that a lot, right? So if you're treated that way, again, it even lowers the guard more, if you're given all of these special perks.
I'll bet they're like, can Dr. Perrodin host a dining conference and serve each of you filet mignon with what is that? Like a hollandaise sauce, hot hollandaise
That'd be
sauce
great.
on it? Who can you trust? Me? I'm giving out free food.
Yeah, I don't give out free food. So,
Then if you did, you'd run into a whole bunch of other problems. Like what if they're a vegetarian?
right.
What if they're on a diet or something? But all right. So we're talking about consumer perceived value here. But as we all know, it's pretty effective on its own, but it becomes really effective when you pair it with social proof, which is another marketing term. Do you have any stories of like when companies approach maybe superintendents of a school that had a shooting, or parents of the victims, and get them to be social proof? Do you have any like mind-blowing stories of that?
Yeah, both of those things happen. For one, school safety apps. Okay, so that is such a nebulous area right now, but every district largely has a school safety app. And what the app is supposed to do is either allow a student to report a threat. So of course, that has to be paired with how are you teaching students to identify threats and what does this all mean? And the other one is if we have to evacuate, that then the students would get notified on their phone and they'd be able to know where to go. And all these things sound great in theory, but in practice, they typically aren't nearly that effective if they work at all. But saturation is everything, Nick. So saturation is people come in, vendors come in and say, we have 20% of the districts in your state use this app, okay? And they use this, and they'll give examples. They'll ask districts, can we use your district as an example? Can we identify your district by name? And if we do, we'll give you a 20% discount, for this first year. So you can be like our model district. And they'll usually, yeah, well, why not? We're using the product, so we'll take this. Well, what they've done is they've just got social proof, right? Because then they can leverage you. It's benchmarking. They can say, look at this district. They've got their stuff together. Now, we're not saying you don't. We're just saying you haven't had the opportunity yet to have a product like ours. And now we're giving you the opportunity. Look at the other districts that are using this. Like, it's working really well, and they've had great things that they've said about it. So once they do that, first of all, superintendents and school boards will follow what other superintendents and school boards do. If someone has done what they think is the research ahead of time, they'll go with it. They're not going to invest in it. They'll just say, okay, they did it. They must have done the research in it. So we'll just go along. And of course, it becomes pressure because the statement is, well, this district has made the commitment to school safety to use our product, which offers these benefits. Tell me why you're not making the same commitment to make your students and staff safe. Well, that's a leading question. I mean, how do you really answer that without kind of incriminating yourself as saying, we're not going to use this because, well, what's the because? Because it costs too much money? Because, we've already told you it works. This district knows that it works. So it is this ripple down effect. Superintendents in my classes tell me this. If other districts are doing things for safety, people take note of that, especially if it's things they can see, bollards, fences, cameras, stuff like that. And then they want it. And why do they have it? Why don't we have it? So it is really downhill marketing. It's copying the actions of others. And it's another thing, Nick, is it's blindly vetting this information. Also, national organizations that represent different school administrator groups. There was an article came out in the 72million.org and said the National Superintendent Organization was accepting, I think it was like $15,000 from vendors to be a solutions partner, right? So basically, you can say, well, we're vetted by this organization, this school organization, and then they'd say, okay, that's good enough for me, instead of doing their own research. And I really have a problem with school organizations taking money for products and then vetting them. But yeah, it's downhill. It's wildfire. It just catches on. And if you stand up against it, I mean, you just look bad as a superintendent. Not that you're bad, but you're perceived as slowing down progress. Why are you standing in the way of making us safer? School board, parents are coming out. Why don't we have the bulletproof films? Like, this is crazy. I'm not sending my kid here. I can open and roll out. Like, get your stuff together, district. And people, Nick, for taxes, like, people will bitch about taxes going up all the time, right? Our tax bill. But if you say the tax bill is going up 5% or 5 cents, per thousand because of instructional materials, we need to upgrade our computers. People be like, yeah, I don't know. Like, the computers, when I was back in school, like, come on, do you really need that? If you say it's going up 20 cents because we're going to put in a secured entrance with metal detectors and we're going to put in new surveillance, people be like, put it in. And when people want a referendum passed these days to build additions and stuff on school, if you put the word school safety in, it almost always passes. It's just the marketing, right? If you say, we have to replace the windows on our school because the school's 40 years old, the windows of their lifespan's up. We have to replace the doors. We have to do the parking lot. And if you pitch that to the public, they're like, well, why the hell weren't you taking care of those things in the first place? Like, now we got to pony up some money. And it's like, well, this is life expectancy of this. You change that narrative and you say, to increase the safety of our facility, we're going to replace the windows, we're going to replace our doors, and we're going to reconfigure our parking lot. If you just say that, people vote yes, no questions. So it's crazy, right? That happens all the time now.
It's like, and we were just talking about this before this when you interviewed me. It's like people throw it back on the principal. It's like, okay, if you want to be the one school, if you want to be the one school in the district that doesn't have this security system, fine. But if anything happens, you will personally be the principal who let all this shit happen to your school. But
Right.
nobody ever says if you buy this security system, you could go down in history as the principal who just blew the district's budget on a security system that where we
Yeah.
still had fights or school shootings anyway. Especially with the bulletproof windows. It's like think about it. Well, one, bulletproof depends on what the bullet is and what gun you're using. But also, like imagine if there's a school shooting in the classroom and the person locks the door from the inside. Normally the police could just like break in through the window. If it's a bulletproof window, presumably it's also harder to
Completely.
bash open with a battering ram. Then they would have to sit there and watch the student just like murder everybody else. That's gotta
Yeah. So
that's gotta fuck up the police officers who have to watch that.
it does. And the other part is if you're on the outside, Nick, and so there have been some shootings where snipers have been outside of the building and they're looking in at the student. If they have to fire through a window that has a bulletproof or bullet resistant coating on it, they can't anticipate where the bullet will go. It's not going to go straight through. So it's again, that it kind of takes your sniper option out. And actually I've had districts who have said that if you're in the building and you're in the classroom, there's a fire or something, you have to get out through a window. If the window has a film on it, it's very hard to break out through a window. Or even if like the police were saying, okay, like there's a hypothetically a shooter on this side of the building, like the campus that you showed. I mean, a very big campus, and they're saying, okay, like go out the windows. Like you'd be like, we can't. Like these things are like, they're just like all stuck together. We can't break the window out. And then I've also seen crazy stuff like people be like, yeah, this window-proof film. I'm like, window-proof film? This is a fucking third floor of your building. I mean, what are you? Tell me how the bulletproof film in the angle of the ground of somebody. I mean, who sold you this product, right? There was no thinking in this. But yeah, it's absolutely insane to think about, how this stuff comes about. And here's another thing. So there's a research study, the Hashong-Mahone research study. Back kind of where you're at, Washington State area, California, Oregon, looked at thousands of classrooms and the sunlight, natural sunlight coming in, and they found out, hey, kids that have more sunlight in their classrooms do better, right? Now, when you put window films on, it knocks down the lumens or the amount of sunlight that comes in. So actually, you have less sunlight coming in. So there's an argument to be made there of when you start to do that, when you start to build new schools without windows or small windows, you're not getting the sunlight that, kids' academic performance goes down. No one looks at the research though. No one cares.
But wait, who cares if the academic performance goes down? It's not like schools are here to teach people anything. I thought they were just daycares for kids.
Yeah. So, I mean, so nobody has a learning objective, right? It looks at how the instructional aspect of students is impacted by any of these things. I mean, that's absolutely just out the window. People don't look at that.
Yeah. I mean, I forgot what I was going to say, but and I guess kind of to switch gears a little bit. Remember when I first started emailing you, I had this question. It's like, why dystopian novels are so effective is usually because they describe this world where things are bad. The only reason it's effective is because you look at it and think like, oh, that's pretty much what we have now, or I can see how our world would become that. Like, have you ever seen Black Mirror? It's on Netflix.
Sure. Yeah.
Like, if it was nothing, if you couldn't imagine it actually happening, it wouldn't be effective. So my last question, which I guess was my first question when I emailed you, was imagine you had an evil twin, Pierre Perrodin, because evil twins are always French. Imagine his goal was to create the most unsafe school possible, short of just lining kids up and shooting them. Like, what realistically would that type of school look like? Maybe they'd it's not very unrealistic now, but it's like, and everyone comes on, it's like, stop right there, we'll buy it. Maybe they would, maybe if like there was a fight and someone was getting bullied, maybe they'd punish the person getting bullied. Like, what do you think realistically that would look like?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really thought-provoking question, because I think there's two ways to look at that. One is you could say you could sell and fortify to the point where you would completely make students vulnerable to anything. And here's an example. So school districts now are being marketed virtual reality field trips. So kids don't have to go to Washington, D.C. or their state capital, all these things where bad things could happen, right? So I think that's one approach, and that's very effective. People coming in and marketing say, we're gonna do this virtual reality stuff. But then what happens when the kid actually has to go out somewhere, or what happens when they get to their first experience in an environment they've never been in before, like a bigger city? They get hung up on a delayed flight or something like that. They never had to go out of their tourists. They've been super protected by parents and these marketers, and now they get into some chaos. They just kind of crumble. And then, boy, I think, what would be some of the most unsafe stuff in schools? I think it comes down to the apps. The apps are marketed and they're being downloaded on personal devices, and what data is really being harvested on those? How easy is it to break in and to hijack those devices too? So I think there's a lot of vulnerability. And maybe the last one, I talked about this yesterday. I was doing a keynote for a conference, is a mental health, student mental health conference. And I said, one of the reasons kids and parents aren't agreeing to student mental health in schools is they don't trust that the school will protect the data. So like if a ninth grade student is having depression or anxiety and the school says, okay, we can put you into a 2-month program where we have a community counselor come in and work with you and all of that. Parents are like, okay, but what if that data gets stolen, like down the road? Because we all get these things. Like, I've got this coupon over here for Zappos. Hey, we're going to give you 10% off your order because we, let your data get out in 2015, and this is the settlement. So, you get 10% off a pair of shoes. And then it's, so I think those types of things, just getting kids. Well, I guess I talk about it in the book too, when I talk about the social contract. How much are you willing to hand over to the government in order for you to feel safe? And we're really pushing kids and parents to this whole thing of like, just give this money over to the government, give it over to the vendors, give your trust over that. We've got your back. We know what we're doing. So people just don't think for their own. And I think that's where, when we get one generation out, when we get 10 years from now, we're going to have people who are just they're not going to challenge when the school says, and I think this will actually happen. Schools will come out and say, we're going to do a implant in students, optional, and we'll always know then where the student is. Okay. I would have thought that's dystopian. Like, that's crazy. If that would have come out 10 years ago, people would be like, that's insane. I think if you do it 5 years from now, you'd get more than 50% of the parents to agree to it. And I would say even maybe higher. Like, I just don't think it's that far off, because imagine you come in as a marketer and you say, we'll always know where the kid is. You'll have a device at home. If they ever wander, if they ever get stranded, if they ever get kidnapped, right? We will know. And if we have a school evacuation, we'll know where they are. It's invasive. It's the size of a grain of rice. But, no one talks about how this then furthers that social contract of eroding privacy and really, would that work? Like, would that make you any safer to have that in a school? But I worked with a district in Wisconsin, a very rural district. And when I went there, there were signs in yards saying, government, stay out. Don't trust the government. Like, people are spraying on plywood. I mean, it's really weird. And I got to the district and I was talking to the superintendent, and this some really wild school safety stuff. Like, they have baseball bats in classrooms. This was like their way to battle intruders, but they got this funding.
School shooters? Yeah. I'm just imagining like a school shooter. It's like, don't worry, I got the bat. And he just swings it to block the bullets.
Kind of like a Skywalker thing. Ding, 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 ding.
I was like, okay, I know what you do. So you give the teachers a baseball bat, and then you sign them up for like lightsaber combat classes of blast deflection. Okay, 4 and 4. 1, 2, 3.
See, it's more than just selling the bat, right, Nick? It's selling the program on how to do that.
And you could make it expensive too, because like, it's a training program. You got to do the lightsabers, and honestly, people would pay for that just for fun. Like, there are people like, you ever heard of HEMA?
No.
It stands for Historical European Martial Arts. Okay. So you learn how to fight with a sword, like the way that medieval knights and soldiers were taught to fight. Like, it has a little buckler. It's like, imagine like a little dinner plate as a shield.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's like I'd imagine doing that, but for like lightsabers and baseball.
And as we jest on this though, I think it drives home a point, right? It drives home a point that it, our parallel universe isn't that far from a real universe with this. And yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm looking at these bats and I'm like, tell me again the plan with these, exactly how this would work. But so I met with the superintendent and he's talking about some of the safety stuff they put in. I said, yeah, tough crowd here, right? Like I drove in and there's like 10 signs, like anti-government signs. And this is like a rural area, generational poverty, and just really. And he said, yeah, we just put this thing in our buildings and it takes people's driver's license, parents, and they have to give their driver's license to the front desk person, and it gets scanned and then it goes through, I don't know, this is a program they got, but through, again, a vendor sold it to them. And then they can tell if the person has any outstanding warrants, like if they're child predators, sex offender lists, all of this stuff, right? And then they can let them in the school. So I'm thinking, oh man, I bet you got a ton of feed, but people are like, screw that. Like, there's no way. Like, he's like, nope, nobody complained at all. Like, even the people who will come to board meetings and just be angry and just anti-government and all of this, and they would have the signs. If they came in, they pile out of their pickup truck and they come in and they're just generally angry, and the receptionist says, I need your license. I'll be like, wait a second, it's in the truck, I'll go get it. And they go get it. And again, it's this weird marketing and this weird approach of, if they believe it makes the schools safer, even though they're anti-government and their license is being scanned. And if this whole scanning thing, if they had a weapon or if they were just belligerent and they wanted to go down and have a word with the teacher, they could push their way through. They stop and they agree to this. And to me, Nick, that was like this dystopian thing where all of a sudden the dystopian and reality kind of started to blend. And I felt I was in Rick and Morty. And I'm like, Rick, slow it down. I can only do like 7 universes a day. And I'm like, how in the hell did that work? And how did the marketer know that this would be successful in a place where I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, I would have never proposed this. I would have thought like fortifications people maybe would see some of that, but like this whole thing of like getting information on them when they're already skeptical. But like, people are so willing. And once you erode that social contract, once you give, it's hard or impossible to get that back. And I wrote about that in the book when I wrote about Hobbes' Leviathan, which was really an interesting thing for people to read about, because I took on things, and where people, I looked at safety in ways people never look at. Transference dynamic, what does safety look like when you're older based upon how you're raised? How does that influence your safety? Chaos theory, everybody thinks it's a bad thing. It's really not a bad thing. But yeah, oh my God. So getting into, some of the questions of what does this look like? I don't know. I mean, it's almost like if you did nothing outside of just locking your doors and having your kids reporting, that would maybe be one of the safest schools out there.
So the opposite of that would be like something that actively discourages that. Like you mentioned in the book, it's like, well, when someone pulls a fire alarm, we don't shift the focus to like the person who did it.
Right.
Like, you pulled the alarm, that's it. Like a microphone doesn't say, what's your name? Why
Right.
did you pull the alarm? Are you sure there isn't a chemistry class?
Yeah.
But I'm just weird. Like an anti-government district would allow it. I could imagine that type of district support like arming students even. Like I can, especially in those types of areas, I'd imagine there would be a lot more Mexican standoffs in high schools. And that would have been fun to see. It's like,
you talk about arming students, like there are states, especially in the southern part of our country, where that's starting to become a viable discussion. Like 18-year-old adult students, should we allow carry on campus at a high school? And I'm like, whoa, but I would have thought that wasn't even part of the dialogue. That wouldn't be something you'd discuss, but it's being discussed right now. So yeah, some of the stuff I thought, Nick, that was off limits like 5 years ago, or it's just stuff I didn't think would ever happen. I shared with you too, like there was a company that made and marketed and sold a device that would be in the corner of a classroom that had a camera on it, and then it also had a gun. And it could be remotely controlled, but the thought was if there was a shooter, there would be a little speaker. There was a speaker in it too, I guess. It'd say, stop right there. Like, look in the corner of the room, and it'd be like, this would be flashing or whatever. Drop your weapon or we'll fire. I mean, it's like, holy smokes, like,
Human shield. There you go.
that's actually, and then part of it, this big page of like, and don't worry, it has like a bulletproof coating in Kevlar, so you couldn't shoot out the camera or something. I'm like, yeah, that wasn't my first worry, but
The wall might not be the problem. It's
uh,
like maybe the gun is like shoot the wall that is like holding it together.
I mean, the whole thing, I mean, this thing, oh my God. It, all of these things, but they get put in place, right? People actually have these types of things. So